So I suggest that we would start the session now. The whole conference is running a bit late, but it's no problem. It always happens, and it's usually a sign that the discussions are going very well and people just enjoy the exchange of ideas. So I very much welcome you to this parallel session. I'm Thomas Fues from Germany, Associate Researcher with the German Development Institute. We have a what I find very challenging session now on the issue of peace and conflict management. This is quite a sensitive area, and I'm very happy that the organizers of the conference included this, because it really gets us to the middle of some conflicts or tensions in the global system, but also relating to South-South cooperation and relationships. And it's very good that we focus now on this area as elemental, fundamental element of sustainable development. I mean, we all are pretty much very clear that the 2030 Agenda or Sustainable Development Goals, they need peace and a proper management of conflicts so that sustainable development can be realized. I'm very happy now that we have a quite diverse, a fascinating panel of experts from various regions and various areas of engagement. So just to go down the line, we have Mr. Carlos from Brazil, a military research institution. We have Mr. Kaustuv from a more research-oriented civil society group, if I understand it correctly. And we have Mr. Denis from UN Office of South-South Cooperation, which is one of the co-hosts here, so thank you very much. And then we have Mr. Deepak. He's with a research institution in Nepal, and Professor Ruchita, she's an expert, a scholar from an Indian institution. So as we go through the presentations, I would ask you to kindly try to be as concrete and specific as possible in referring to instances or examples where we can already look at the impact and the effects of South-South and triangular cooperations for peace and conflict management. So give us, please, some idea about specific cases that we can look at. The second point there that I'm very interested in is what are the lessons learned from these specific cases and examples, real-life empirical evidence that you're looking at. And then something that came up in the previous sessions, what can we conceive of as the sort of a multilateral framework where all these examples and the experiences are brought together? What institutional frameworks are you aware of, or can you think of, so that these individual cases of South-South and trilateral cooperation are brought into a larger context, and the different actors there can learn from each other and maybe even talk about some sort of meta-governance in this specific area. Of course, particularly here I'm referring to the existing mechanisms and institutional frameworks of the United Nations, but also of the regional organizations like the African Union. That would be very much an interest of mine. And please be so kind to stick to the 10-minute limit of your presentation so that we can have some time to share with the audience here. So with regard to the presentations, the order of presentations, I think we'll just go by the program as it is listed here. And as I can see, we will have Mr. Carlos from Brazil. Maybe as you start, you can say a few words about your institution and how it sort of relates to the military and defense architecture in Brazil. Thank you, Mr. Carlos. sorry, I made a big mistake.
No?
There's a line here in the program, so which led me to Mr. Carlos, but sorry, Mr. Denis is first. I apologize. Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here talking about South-South cooperation. Usually, a lot of the forums that I'm in, I'm trying to get a word into South-South cooperation. And today, the whole day, we're talking about it. I'm from the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. I'm based in Bangkok, Thailand. I cover the Asia-Pacific region, but I'm also an African from Zimbabwe. This morning, we heard that over 170 wars are ongoing, and that most of those are taking place in the South. This is an important statistics because it shows that we have a lot of work to do if South-South cooperation has to be applied in the area of peace building and conflict management. Recently, I had an experience where I was working with a regional institution mapping their South-South cooperation. And what struck me was looking at their charter, that one of the first things that are outlined is that they were being created to maintain peace in the region, to promote peace in the region. So for me, that shows that a number of countries have, for a long time, been open to the prospects of the regional institutions promoting peace and forming them for the purpose of promoting peace. But what struck me also is that in looking at more detail in terms of what they were doing, and we were trying to reconcile what they are doing with the work that is being done under the SDGs. There was in particular an area on resiliency. And on resiliency, there was a lot of information on natural disasters. We focused a lot on natural disasters. We focused a lot on economic shocks. However, there was very little on peace building or conflict prevention. So this in a way shows that we have this idea that conflict prevention is important, and yet sometimes we do shy from it, as the moderator was saying. We look at climate change, we look at other damage, but if we look today in terms of some of the impacts that we have had from conflict, I think we can all agree that it takes countries way back in terms of development. It disrupts countries for a very, very long time, whereas a natural disaster may happen for a short time. Some conflicts have gone on for years and years. And another point I wanted to make is that it's so important in peace building and conflict management to work with the neighbors. And why is it so? The main reason is that a lot of the conflicts happen because a neighbor or another country or some countries in the region may actually provide safe havens for people that are fighting within a country. And as has been said this morning, we realize that most of the conflicts that are taking place are actually in parts of the country. We rarely have countries fighting against each other. So if they are in some part of the country, it happens sometimes that the neighboring country may be a safe haven, and that the rebels may be getting resources from that country, that they may be escaping and hiding in that country, and may even have some sympathies from that country. And so it's very important to have a good neighbor policy for the other countries in the region to be supportive. Another point that I wanted to raise is whether the principles of South-South cooperation about non-conditionality, non-interference actually make it difficult for South-South cooperation to be applied in the area of peace building and conflict management. I think again this morning we touched on it when somebody referred to responsible sovereignty. That means that we have realized the limitations that if we go with the principles at face value, it will not help us to resolve this problem. That's why there has to be the insertion of the responsibility of sovereignty. Now, I wanted to conclude by saying that instead of equating South-South cooperation to what we do at the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, I see South-South cooperation as broader, as being led by the countries themselves. And why is that so? It is that we in the United Nations system, and I have colleagues that are working in this area, my role here is just to project a little bit of what they've been doing. They've taken the Secretary General's Sustaining Peace document, and we have tried as the UN Office for South-South Cooperation to get a concept, a strategy going for how South-South cooperation can be brought about in addressing these issues. And I think what has struck me most is that how similar this is to the development process. For example, we have realized that it is very important for the countries that are affected to have the ownership of the process. And also that it is very important to have a multi-sectoral approach to peace building. In the case of the United Nations system, all UN agencies coming aboard to address the issue. And also we have realized that it is important to have prevention. Just like in disaster reduction, you have to have prevention before it happens. And in case it happens, during the process of addressing it, you have to be looking at prevention for the future. And then even if you manage to arrest the conflict, you have to work all the time to be able to prevent a recurrence of the conflict. Now, I wanted to mention one very little thing about South-South cooperation and the way that we engage countries, the protagonists. I think we've had a lot of experiences where from the north, we tend to point out at countries when we think they are erring. We tend to have conditionality, we introduce sanctions. But if you look at it from a cultural context, and particularly from the south, the region that I've been working in, it's very important for people not to lose face. And therefore, you cannot shout at people in public and say, change your ways. It might be better to use another avenue where you use friends, use peers, and I think this is the context in which we can bring South-South cooperation to bear in this instance. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Denis, for, first of all, reminding us of the prevalence of violent conflict in the world, particularly in the South, and the tension. I also find your point very interesting on the tensions, potential tension between the principle of non-interference and responsible sovereignty, because then there may be situations where the community of nations may want to move in and exert certain pressure on governments that are not fulfilling their responsibility, their sovereign responsibilities. And I think that's a very fascinating point to explore. And then I also would want to mention, and then maybe we can hear more about this later in the discussion point, that your office, UN Office for South-South Cooperation, and UNDP, you sort of coordinate a network, a global network on South-South cooperation. And I noticed through email communication lately that you have set up a working group to bring together, to draw together the knowledge and the experience in this area. So I think that would be interesting to hear more about it at a later stage. Okay, now with this, we turn to the next speaker, Mr. Carlos. The floor is yours.
As I was saying, it's a privilege to be here, and I would like to thank RIS for making this possible, and thank you all for your time. Please note that the views I'm going to express here this afternoon do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the Pandia Calogeras Institute, where I work. I'm a career policy specialist, but I'm on leave now. I'm affiliated to Taiwan National University as a sabbatical. I still represent in this event the institute because I still have a formal affiliation with them, even though I'm on sabbatical. I know it may sound complicated, but that's how it works, how I got to be here. With this in mind, I would like to humbly offer basically two contributions to this conference. The first one is theoretical. After this morning's sessions, it's actually easier to say what I'm going to say. I'm going to echo some of the views expressed here, especially the one related to the need of theorizing South-South cooperation, as opposed to those those who believe that we don't need to theorize, or we don't need theories about South-South cooperation. And as remarkably as it may sound, we've seen commentators, not only in this conference, but in previous conferences, saying that to what extent we need theories of South-South cooperation. And maybe one basic argument is how can we support any policy today without evidence, without theories, without science? They are all interlinked. I also agree with the argument according to which it's necessary to challenge some basic assumptions of international relations theory as far as South-South cooperation is concerned. Sorry, I had a PowerPoint presentation, but I forgot. It's okay. It's fine. I can make it available later. I just forgot about it. No. It's fine. It's fine. Sorry about that. Well, I was talking about assumptions that we need to challenge because of the emergence of South-South cooperation, especially the successful kind. And maybe because those assumptions, they were created or constructed or crafted during the Cold War or immediately after the Cold War. And they do not make sense anymore in a world that is rapidly changing as today. One of those assumptions is based on the costs of non-cooperation. For those who are not familiar with theories of cooperation, the traditional ones, they're all based in game theory, in which there is a particular kind of rationality. For one to win, the other one has to lose, or you have to optimize gains for both to win, and etc. You have a large body of literature about this. However, some recent developments have shown, especially related to so-called stochastic games and other forms of rationalities, that sometimes people cooperate just because it's good to cooperate. And it's based more on principles and feelings and not necessarily in immediate or automatic payoffs. Another assumption is that security issues, they are more important than any, according to certain approaches of international relations. And as we can notice from already a long period of time, these assumptions, they don't hold. We can think of collective international action playing a fundamental role in achieving today arguably the most prosperous and peaceful moment in history of humankind in terms of international conflict. We hear the news, we listen to the news every day and watch the news, and all we see is war, but fact is, in terms of casualties, we live in arguably the most peaceful time. The problems and the mortality is coming from mostly interstate conflicts. So this is one of the issues that we might bear in mind. My second humble contribution is empirical. There has been a growing body of research that focus on successful cases of South-South cooperation, yet they seldom deal with these main issues. Issues such as non-proliferation. In a nutshell, contrary to Western narratives, the Global South is not only about creating rogue nuclear states such as North Korea or Iran, to name a few. Fact is that there are excellent cases of non-proliferation arising from the Global South. I would like to point out 3 relevant arguments / examples. First, we shall always remember that the only country who voluntarily denuclearized was South Africa. However, even in the Global South, interest for this theme is virtually non-existent. Also, most nuclear-free zones are located in the Global South. Regardless of the enormous pressures made by central countries in that direction of creating such free zones, they would not have come into fruition if it wasn't for political will and political engagement from the Global South. In other words, they do not exist just because the North wanted them to exist, but because the Global South in general bought the idea. A third argument example in the particular case of non-proliferation is one of my favorites with regards to the Brazilian-Argentine Agency for Accounting and Control of Nuclear Materials. For those who don't know, Brazil and Argentina, they were competing regional in South America and Latin America powers in the 60s and the 70s, and they had military nuclear programs. If you don't know, they were terminated in the 80s. And one of the byproducts, one of the outcomes of this whole political process of, first of all, giving up on nuclear armaments, obviously with enormous pressures from the international community, but if it wasn't for the fact that both countries also bought this idea, we wouldn't have one of the largest nuclear-free zones in the world, which is based on the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which encompasses basically the whole of Latin America. And this agency, which is considered one of the benchmarks for nuclear approachment, and oftentimes is used as a benchmark case for India and Pakistan or North and South Korea as an institutional framework. So I highly recommend those who are interested in this issue to do research about ABAC, which is the Argentina-Brazilian agency that I just mentioned. Apart from non-proliferation, there is also peacekeeping. Maybe I should go there and just show, I still have time? No? Yeah, just show a map. Yeah. I'm sorry. Well, in any case, this chart shows the ranking of contributors by country to peacekeeping operations, UN. Remembering that we have peacekeeping operations according to other regional organizations, such as the American Organization of American States. These are only UN, and most of the donors for peacekeeping are from the South. However, the 20 largest arms exporters in this recent time frame are largely from central northern countries. To conclude with a very simple example of bilateral defense cooperation between, there are a number of studies that show this particular kind of cooperation, bilateral defense cooperation, usually involving military aspects, training, exchange of information and techniques and joint exercises. They have a collateral, they have an impact, positive impact on security as a whole, and also on development assistance. So this is one of the best cases for already a large quantity of evidence, scientific, that bilateral defense cooperation may be one mechanism to further international cooperation as a whole in security issues, and also development assistance. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks a lot, Carlos, for your points on the need to theorize South-South cooperation, and then the empirical evidence and the examples which you cited. I'm particularly, of course, struck by your reference to the Argentina-Brazilian institutional agency, which then handled the nuclear control, if I understood correctly, and that you feel that it provides lessons learned for other regions and conflicts, possibly India, Pakistan. That's something that maybe we can address in other presentations or later in the discussion. To what extent that particular successful example has been picked up by the UN system or UN Office for South-South Cooperation, and the lessons learned made available to other conflict areas. Thank you very much. So with this, we turn to Mr. Deepak. Now you are based in Nepal, and here we are talking about an area of potential. And if we look back at the events of last year of real conflict building up there and the tensions, of course, here I'm referring to the interests of your two big neighbors, China and India. I wonder how you look at the possibilities of South-South cooperation, collective and joint action to address these tensions, particularly in your region.
Thank you, Chair and co-panelists and respected scholars. I am not an expert, but I have some experience when I am working in this youth and social organizations since 2000. I visited almost all the districts of Nepal and almost all the states of India also. So far South-South cooperation is concerned, so we have to engage the youth and students to bring the peace and resolve the conflict. Because students have very important role to make the social transformation. And leaderships, they are coming from the youth sides. If youths are engaged in the social activities, it's a long time, so we will get the leadership from the different fields, for the different fields. So we have to engage the youth in the economic activities, educational activities. So we have to think about the educational system also in this South-South Cooperation Forum. Sometime I am thinking the students who passed class 9, up to 9 and 10, even the selection examination, but the pass percentage of the 10th and 12th are very less. So the other students, whether they are suffering from mental retardation, whether they are suffering from schizophrenic disease, the 30% pass percentage is the only. My question is this: if any government has any agenda to engage these not passed out students, what are the activities they are engaging? Let me tell you, Northeast insurgency and Nepal Maoist insurgency. Almost the students who did not pass the class 10 examination, and they engage in the Maoist insurgency, and even in the Northeast. There are 49 type of insurgency organized in the Northeast India, all are their youths. So why we are not focusing for the youth activities? So in our education system, we have to develop national character and discipline among the students. Unless the participation of the youth, the peace cannot bring and conflict is not able to resolve. Therefore, we have to engage the youth in the constructive activities. Let me tell you LTT example. When the police and force capture these young people, they take cyanide. How they motivated these young people? And why we are not able to motivate these young people toward the nation cause? I have so many experience, and we applied in our organization, social organization. More than 100 students, 100 youths, we back from the Maoist activities to the social activities, towards social activities. Number of workers now we have. We able to motivate these young people. But government and think tank are not involved, are not interested. And sometimes I am thinking, whenever a 50 student gather and they start to demand, the government agency do not hear unless they vandalize. Then they come to the outside. Why there are not dialogue between these young people? What are your demand? Why you are shouting? So we have to change the mindset of the government system. This mindset. And so far development is concerned, we have to have the holistic approach. Holistic means not merciless, merciful development. Why I am saying merciless? Sometime we establish medical college. For example, I am saying, the conflict between the local people and the medical students are there. Why this happened? Very interesting example I am giving you. I think it was in 1970, after 1970, Film and Television Institute of India, it is Pune. So there was one course that is acting. The local people, they against, because the students who are coming for the acting study, so there are activities in their area. So there was conflict between the local people and this institution. So they demand the government, and government has stopped that course for few years. So we have not to have the conflict between the local people, not contrast between. So contrast means in the name of culture, tradition, sometimes it is very different. The concept of the development of the local people and other companies. So there is no dialogue between this. So youth are always have that potential to raise the question. It is very good because youth have that potentiality. So we have to motivate these young people in a right direction to resolve this conflict. I am giving one example in our Bhagavad Gita. It is Dosro Adhyaya. Arjuna asked to the Lord Krishna, how this conflict come? And Krishna said, it is in Sanskrit, Dhyayato Visayam Pumsa Sangastesu Pajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha Kamat Krodho Vijayate. And Krodhat Bhavati Sammoha Sammoha Smriti Vibhrama Smriti Bhramsat Buddhinaso Buddhinasat Pranasati. What is the meaning of this? Why conflict occur? Krishna is saying here, if you want to claim this is mine, and if somebody also claim this belongs to mine, so then conflict occurs. When conflict occurs, the person will become angry. And when person become angry, and there will fight. So this is the main thing. So we have to find out what are our traditional knowledge to cope this conflict and making the peace building. Therefore, we have to have that sufficient academic institution to bring the leadership and engage the youth toward the social and constructive activities. Youth, they don't have any work. I am always saying, for example, youths are staying there, 50 youths are there. They are playing carom board. And someone came there. Oh, what are you doing here? There is one issue. Now we have to have agitation. We have to have the ikigai to this person. You come, I will give you 1,000 rupees. The people will go, youth are going. Again, someone came there. What are you doing? The person is very good. I am giving you 2,000 rupees. You have to support this person. They are okay because they get money. So, I mean, unless we engage our youth, economic activities, social activities, government activities, then only able to bring this peace and we able to resolve the conflict. Therefore, through the South-South cooperation, a very important role to make the awareness, to engage the government agency, to make the social organization having dialogue, not to occur the conflict. One thing, we are trying to firefighting. Conflict occur and we reach there. We are trying to manage it. But why we are not trying not to occur conflict? And sometimes what I experience, some Western countries and even the UN agency also, they are creating a conflict in the name of women empowerment, in the name of religious freedom, in the name of caste and gender, unless they are doing empowerment. So we have to focus this area also. Why they are doing these things? I have so many examples. So far Northeast are concerned, so far Nepal insurgency are concerned, and so far other conflicts area are concerned. So many, this agency are playing there. So South-South cooperation and TDC have very important role now to engage the youth, to have dialogue with these young people, and through our education system and our other social organization, we have to make the aware students to bring the national character and discipline among the youths and students. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the alerting us to the role of culture and economic factors for conflict, and also the youth, what potential the youth have to be destructive if they do not have the right kind of economic opportunities and social support, and then the role of civil society in addressing these problems. Thank you. With this, we turn to Professor Ruchita, and understand that you have a special expertise in Africa. I wonder if you could address, if you're aware of cases where India gets involved in South-South cooperation, triangular cooperation, to address the peace building and conflict management. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to thank RIS, the organizers, for giving me an opportunity to speak. While I'm the second last speaker, I hope I'll keep you awake by my presentation. We are talking about South-South cooperation in the broad framework and the broad framework of collaboration amongst the countries of South. My previous speakers have already talked about the principles that are involved in the South-South cooperation agenda, but I would like to reiterate them because I will be referring to some of them in my presentation. So what are the principles that guide South-South cooperation? First is respect for national sovereignty. Second, national ownership, equality, non-conditionality, non-interference in domestic affairs, and lastly, demand-driven engagement for mutual benefit. These are the main principles. Now, the emerging powers in the last decade or so have been trying to develop or a framework for South-South cooperation that would help in preventing conflict, in enhancing security and stability across the regions. So each country has evolved its own particular mechanism, and I will be talking briefly to some of the examples into how India has shaped the conflict prevention and promoted peace and stability in Africa. As was referred again earlier, that one of the that we are facing with a large number of conflicts. And unfortunately, it is the African continent which has been involved in some of these conflicts in the recent past. So studying what India has done in Africa becomes really important in gauging the role of South-South cooperation. So in terms of security and conflict prevention, one of the important fact which the southern countries have highlighted is that they have emphasized the linkage between security and development, that security and development are the two sides of the same coin. And this is something which is being increasingly recognized across the world, and Indian leadership has been emphasizing this time and again. And I'd like to refer here to one of the statements made by India during the discussions on the SDGs, and where our representative said that the task of development agenda must be to create conditions for rapid economic growth, eradication of poverty, want, hunger, and holistic and sustainable development. All these, India considers, would build peace, which is, and also lead to conflict prevention and sustainable development. So this is the kind of definition through which India is molding its engagement towards conflict prevention in various parts of the world, including that in Africa at the moment. I will give you three examples here. First, in terms of development and enhancing the peace, one of the important roles that India has played in Africa has been to build the national capacities of the countries right from the post-colonial days. A number of countries in Africa, India supported the development of their national armies. India has been training under the ITEC program a number of officers from these countries. India particularly recognizes that the African countries have focused on capacity building and human resource development. So as a result, Africa today is the largest recipient of the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program. And what is important to note here is that almost 40% of the slots for training in the ITEC program go for training, for military training, for training of the armed forces of the African countries. So here, India, what is India trying to do? It is trying to develop a program to support capacities, building of officers and personnel of the African armed forces through training and exposure to the best practices of Indian armed forces, and offer them an opportunity to study in the various institutions, military institutions all across the Indian country, whether it is the Staff College or the highest organization, that is the National Defense College. So over the years, n number of African personnel and officers have been trained in Africa, in India, on dealing with how to deal with